Hello and welcome to Hot Issues. As you do know, sometime in the week, the Minister for Finance and Economic Planning gave us the budget for 2015. And to the extent that the majority and minority are arguing about it, perhaps it is a controversial budget. There are some positive statements which have been made about this budget, and some have made very negative statements about this budget. What we intend to do today is to bring somebody who knows and who was involved in the process of drawing out this budget to tell us what exactly is in the budget, and to also listen to the analysis of those who proposed this budget. Welcome to Hot Issues. Hello and welcome back to Hot Issues. As I indicated from the beginning, we are talking the 2015 budget today, and we are especially privileged to have with us the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Planning, Mr. Seth Terkper himself. So you're welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pratt.
First of all, what was this budget intended to achieve?
Thank you very much. The theme of the budget was based on the President's State of the Nation address. There has been one thing that has resonated in his State of the Nation addresses, and it is transformation. Based on the fact that for some time now, Ghana, after the rebasing and after the onset of crude oil, exportation of crude oil, has become a lower middle income country. That Ghana's economy has structures which have been with us for a very long time that need to change. So if you position this in the context of the budget, we sought to provide information in three broad areas, which we summarized in the introduction to the budget, that was the statement that was read. First of all, since 2010, we have been battling with the single spine. We had become an oil exporting country. We had also expanded heavily on investment following the declaration of HIPIC and the forgiveness of debts that provided some space, for borrowing. And therefore we have borrowed and expanded on infrastructure in particular at a very fast pace. These were the developments that I would say had both positive and negative elements for the economy in 2013, at the end of 2012. And so we paused in the 2013 budget when we had two large twin deficits, current accounts and budget. We sought to identify the problems with the economy, and we call them overruns, particularly in the budget. First was the overrun in implementing the single spine. Second was the fact that in the first full year of exporting crude oil in 2012, we started in 2011, late 2011, we overestimated the revenue that we were to get from exporting crude oil. As a result of the borrowing to complete particularly major infrastructure, particularly the Gang of Six, our interest or cost of debt service also increased. Then as a result of the design as well as inability to adjust the petroleum prices, we accumulated, and utility, we accumulated huge deficits on the budget, subsidies. And lastly, unfortunately for us, development partners were not also giving us the grants that they had promised. We needed to correct this because it was leading to huge imbalance. If you recall, between 2012 and 2014, therefore, we evolved a number of policies. And as we experienced difficulty in missing, and which resulted in missing targets, we added on to the policies. At the beginning of 2014, we consolidated all these policies in what we call the homegrown policy, which came before the Senchi, gathering that decided to look at the economy. We have been tracking this. We tracked them we first came out with these overruns in the 2012 budget. We gave an overview in the mid-year review 2013, gave an update in the 2014 budget, at which time we consolidated them. We've given the first objective of the budget, this year's budget, was to give an update and to report that we had made some progress with respect to these original challenges, if you like, how the word came about. We had cleared the single spine arrears in excess of 3 billion Ghana cedis in 2 years, in addition to overruns in the wage level itself, the wage payments itself of 1.6 billion. You can position this in the context where your revenue is 15 billion and you are using 4.5 billion as excess, not the original payments. So you are using virtually 1/3 of the revenue, tax revenue, if I may emphasize, from GRA on just it. Second, we had corrected the way the petrol revenues are calculated, and therefore they did no longer result in shortfalls. In fact, there are positives. Third, through the automatic adjustment, one of probably the controversies in the budgets, we've cleared the subsidy, but we have some legacy debt with us, hanging with us. But as far as the original subsidies that we disclosed, the overrun, we cleared them. There are two areas where we did not make that much progress: interest payments or debt service, and the fact that we could not get development partners to give us those grants. So that was the update that we gave. We said, despite these gains, we should have resulted in meeting our targets. The economy came under tremendous pressure in 2013-2014.
You emphasize the point that Ghana has become a middle-income country.
Yes.
What is that in the face of the power crisis? What is that in the face of the downgrading of Ghana's credit worthiness and so on? What is middle-income country if you can't even provide, electricity?
I look at this from three perspectives. First of all our medium-term plans. Some say we don't have a medium-term plan or a long-term plan, but the medium-term plans that we have published, with the acronym in particular 2020, 2015, had the objective of leading the country to become a middle-income country. Let's not forget. What that means is that we were only 5 years ahead, or if you like 10 years ahead of goals that we had set for ourselves as a result of rebasing and the exportation of crude oil. 2015 is next year, and that is when we had said we wanted to become a middle-income country. So there must be something more substantive in becoming a middle-income country than just the accident or providential crude oil that has brought us there.
So what is that substantive thing?
I'm coming to that.
What is middle-income country? Why are we so proud of being a middle-income country?
No,
when all the indications are that we can't provide ourselves with electricity.
We have to plan.
Our credit worthiness is being lowered.
So we have to plan. Those are some of the structural things that I was talking about. Because if you cannot be an export-led country if you do not have the institution to provide credit. You cannot develop infrastructure if you don't have an investment bank or you do not have a sovereign wealth fund. And that would discipline you into borrowing properly, so when you borrow, it is not excessive and you are downgraded. Part of the downgrading has come also from the structure of an economy where gold prices go down, cocoa prices go down, and let's watch it, crude oil prices go down, and it brings so many things down. Your ratios, your GDP falters, as we are saying, and all of a sudden you see that your debt to GDP ratio has risen. even if you are not borrowing, it would rise because your GDP is not rising that much. We are saying there's something structural which is inconsistent, with that notion of the stability which a middle income country should have. But the point I wanted to make is that whether we like it or not, middle income is a statistics. Your GDP is divided by your population. Your per capita income, that is what per capita income means. Let's simplify it. Your output, economists have a way, statisticians have a way of calculating it. Consumption plus investment plus whatever, those who have done economics, or on the expenditure side, put together is your national output divided by your population. Any country whose index, or the product, is above 1,000 US dollars per person becomes a middle income country. And the consequences are that even though you may still have the characteristics of a developing country, or let's say even a least developed country, right? That is how the world is going to look at you. So in our case, let me give two examples of that consequence. First of all, the terms on which we borrow from the World Bank and the African Development Bank, the apex institutions that provide financing for infrastructure developments, which we were talking about, cheap loans, if you like to put it that way, because you can borrow for 40 years. You have a moratorium of 10 years, 30 years to pay. You don't pay interest. What you pay is service charges and other things. Ghana, by becoming a middle income country, can no longer borrow on those terms. As we speak, for both the African Development Bank and the World Bank, we can only borrow and repay for 25 years from 40 years. Still good. But if the narrative I gave earlier, you have your Jubilee gas adding to the outputs. Remember the ratio, output divided by the population. You have your Jubilee gas adding to the output. You have your Sankofa field adding to the output. You have your 10 field adding to your output in 3 years. Those terms are likely to harden, or you may be kicked out. In the World Bank nomenclature, you will be kicked out from an IDA country into an IBRD country, and you are going to be borrowing for your development on the same basis as you do a sovereign bond. I'm simplifying it a bit, but we may be there in 3 years or so. So the question is preparing for it. So
we have to take a break. Okay. We have to take a short break, and when we come back, I'd like to find out what in this budget will give relief or comfort to the disadvantaged people in our society, to industry and to commerce.
Yes.
What are the specific things in this budget that should give us some relief as Ghanaian people? Welcome back to Hot Issues, and we are in conversation with the Honorable Mr. Seth Terkper, Minister of Finance and Economic Planning, and we are looking at the 2015 budget. Sir, what in the budget will give us relief as Ghanaian people, especially the working people, industry and commerce?
First of all, immediately, the problem that industry and business is facing, including households, is the power situation. Without power, industry cannot produce, and even if they produce, it will be at higher costs because they are using generators and they are using diesel instead of gas. Households, similarly, the government's own import bill increases. This is one of the things that happened. Why? Because they are using light crude for the thermal plants instead of gas, which is cheaper. So the energy plan, which we outlined in the budget, first, our own gas processing plant coming on stream, which will now go into, the West Africa gas pipeline, together with the other power parks acts and things that have been announced, and above all, the fact that we have dedicated a compact tool not to too many sectors, but to one sector, which is still energy and power, suggests that in the immediate to near term, the focus is to stabilize the power situation. Now, when you do that, as I said, industry is able to perform and jobs are created. So if you ask about industry, about what goes on for other citizens, that is what I mean. Secondly, we have endeavored to do a serious correction, as I said, and because of the setbacks, we did not achieve our targets. We admit that much, but we are saying that we have to make sure that we do that correction. If you don't do that correction, you end up using a disproportionate amount, unintended, of the budget. When that happens, what has happened in the last few months is that for as long as you are using 60% plus for one element of the budget out of 5, you are not meeting your commitments and responsibilities in other areas. You are not paying contractors. When you don't pay contractors, workers lose jobs. Particularly, again, we are looking at that segment of the population who depend on those types of jobs. Households suffer. We are looking at a situation where, again, a theme of the budget. To finish my thought on that, if you don't, for example, pay for government commitments, school feeding, school under trees, and others which were programs, social intervention programs that were put in place, CHIPS compound, the ones that provide a relief for low-income people, because social intervention program has expanded, particularly in education and health. Government, owes some of these, what we call the statutory funds. The rebalancing and refocusing will enable us continue to meet those commitments. That is another form of relief. We're saying that let's correct the situation about subsidy, right? But let's not forget also that in doing the correction, automatic adjustment, you are also increasing fuel prices. But then, what is the solution? What solution can you pose? Public transportation. So we have announced a rapid transit, as you have in many countries, speed lanes for workers. There are about 400 buses that are going to come to augment the fleet. And we want the state-owned enterprises, as I said earlier on, to manage this well and pay for it, even if it's 60% of the cost. So we have programs like this in the budget that are targeted at the industrial sector, but also targeted at the vulnerable sectors of the economy in terms of social beefing up, the social intervention programs that we have.
At the same time that we're talking about reliefs, we have imposed 17.5% VAT on petroleum products.
With a net,
that certainly should have consequences for the economy.
With a net average increase of 3%.
But it's 17.5% VAT increase on petroleum products at a time when petroleum prices are falling.
Government policy, incidentally, even when it has multiple components and objectives, there's always something which catches the eye. And in this instance, it's a 17.5%. But since we are in a conversation, if I may just try and explain, we did multiple things, with the pricing structure. First, the pricing structure had not been reviewed in a very long time. And there have been incremental pluses and minuses here. So we have margins for all kinds of things. We reviewed those margins, some of them downwards. Second, the method of pricing the crude when we import it, leading to the forex losses, the problem with the BDCs and forex losses and others, was reviewed. We no longer use spot prices predominantly. We look at by the time the LC expires in 90 days, what will be the exchange rate? And that is what is used. But thirdly, we said if we are going to do automatic adjustments and do it well, then you must have a stabilizer in the pricing regime. And the way the stabilizer works, then that's a mitigation account. When prices are falling, yes, you may not reduce it disproportionately, and that's one of the debates now. What you do is that you have a floor, at which point you start putting some money aside in the mitigation account. Then as prices begin to go up, you have a ceiling where at that point you dip from the stabilization account to increase the subsidy so that you don't pass on the full effect of the price increase.
Does this mean that we are abandoning the policy of full cost recovery? Because this is inconsistent with the policy of
it's
full
rather
cost
consistent.
recovery.
It's rather consistent. We are saying that when I say full cost recovery, I should not wait when crude oil prices hit $115 per barrel and pass it on. It doesn't help the economy. It doesn't help the... So if I set the corridor, right, and I'm doing full cost recovery, I'm saying that when prices are going down and they get to the point, where you can say the prices are reasonable, take some of the money and put it, aside. And then when the prices...
But that is not full cost recovery.
No.
Full cost recovery is that the consumer ought to be paying the real price of the product.
Yes, but the consumer has to pay the real price over a term when prices are increasing or prices are decreasing. If I reduce it drastically when prices are reducing, fine, they get a full benefit. But then the prices shoot up. And remember, this is the phenomenon of, commodity prices. And when they shoot up, that is when it begins to hurt the economy if you want to pass it on for not just the consumer but for businesses. And so you have to introduce an element of management. You don't just leave it because you say it's full cost recovery. No.
Is this not the realization that you can not just be passing on cost to the consumer, and that there's a need for interventions in pricing?
And so that is what, yes, we had the intervention, but in the past, the intervention came in the form of saying, let us take tax revenue and pay for the subsidy in order that the price does not, escalate on the markets.
But some of that tax revenue itself was coming from petroleum products.
Except that what we are doing now, yes. So what we are doing now is more targeted. We are saying within that pricing mechanism and the taxes that are there, you are taking part of that revenue and using it to manage the price, and not just putting the whole revenue into the general fund and then not managing that price, because that price is very important for production. That price is very important for business. That price is very important for going to work. That price is very important for going to the market. If you take, let's say, the spectrum, or even going to school, right? So we are saying it needs to be managed. So the fact that you have full recovery, the fact that you have automatic adjustments, does not mean you must do it, in an unplanned manner. And this is what countries have done. The other element which countries like the US, do is a strategic stock. When prices are going down, you can stock. We started it with BOSS. That's the idea behind BOSS. And part of the policy is to expand, the BOSS, because that helps also the price stabilization. So that that US holds strategic stocks for two reasons: to stabilize price, but also in a period of, say, war or whatever, there's that level which they never, deplete. And so what I'm saying is that we have to learn these experiences and use it to help in managing the economy the same way the advanced countries. But when it comes to the VAT, there were three sectors. VAT is a consumption tax. If you buy water, you pay VAT. Your dress, you pay VAT. Your shoe, you pay VAT. Wristwatch, you pay VAT. A certain expenditure, therefore, pattern of expenditure is paying VAT. There were 3 sectors where there was no VAT on the expenditure: real estate, which happens to be developing, petroleum, and financial services. There are 2 reasons why they are not taxed. First, there's some technical difficulty in taxing that sector, which is widely acknowledged. It doesn't matter whether it's a developing country or... And let me give you a quick example. If I am taxing expenditure or consumption, if I build my house, is this savings or expenditure? For many people, it's savings, because they will never sell their house. And even if they put it on the market, they will want to buy another one. So the question of whether it's savings or it's consumption and the VAT has never been really settled by a formula that would distinguish the two. The same with financial services. The prime cost or expenditure or income of financial services is interest. But when you earn interest, is it from saving or from the service which the bank is rendering to you? One is savings, one is expenditure. So you don't have to target the savings element. And that's why in taxing the financial services, we are careful to say that what we are taxing is fee-based services, not interest. Okay. Now, we say that...
But we've moved from petroleum pricing into something else now.
No, I'm explaining.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And petroleum was a third. We are saying that as we mature, and to the extent that despite the difficulties, that's also the expanding sectors of the economy, and consumption is taking place there, relatively speaking, by people with better incomes. If you look at the types of that we're talking about, let's find a mechanism for bringing them into the VAT net. So there's that element of the rationalization of the tax. So that what I'm saying is that the introduction of the VAT on these 3 products is not just on account of revenue, but we've been rationalizing excises, income taxes for the last 3 years. So that is the other element. That goes to
But
it.
Isn't there a problem with increasing the price of petroleum products at a time when the world market price of crude is dipping? Isn't there a problem? Because people were expecting that you would announce a decrease. Now you have announced an increase.
Yes, I explained there are 2 reasons that are accounted for the increase. Not 17.5, but 3%.
No, 17.5 VAT, resulting in a 3% increase in the price.
Remember, we brought in a number. I don't want to be too technical. Remember, the VAT itself.
Sometimes you can't help it. So.
I know, yes.
Yeah.
The VAT itself, remember, you charge 17.5%, but you also get credit for the VAT on all your inputs. So the net, that's why it's a value added tax. It's the tax on only the value addition. So the 17.5 recognizes that the input for producing the crude or for buying the crude, for importing it and whatever, has attracted VAT already, and somebody has paid them. When the petrol didn't have that VAT, it was being added. Now that you have a VAT, that credit will be given. So the net effect is, if all these costs were 80 and the sales is 100, the value addition is 20. And therefore, the actual VAT at that stage, because others have paid already, is not 17 of 100, but 17 of 20. Right? So that explains the smaller amount. But remember, I've also said that we have removed some margins and others, and we are also setting out the mitigation account. So it's the net effect of all this. But something else that kicked in the analysis that we did was the cross subsidy. So you see from the Finance Committee's report and for the work we did that LPG was going down on account of its domestic use and in preference for fuel wood. Premix, there was no increase. RFO, on account of competition and exports, there was no increase. There was a 2.8% increase in, I believe, one of the MGO, and then it's only diesel and petrol that increased at 3%. So you can see that even in the restructuring that was done we have taken multiple factors into account. First, we have reviewed the structure. Second, we have changed certain, as a result of we changed certain margins. Third, we had introduced in the taxation structure VAT, which is a VAT on all expenditure. And then third, we have established a mitigation account. The net effect of all this is the slight increase. So it's not just on account of crude oil. And remember, I also said that when the prices are falling, and by our calculation, the price where we should set that floor actually is around $90. And then the ceiling should be around $110, which means that when the price hits 90 and starts and goes below, that's when you should actually be building the fund for the day when the price will breach 105, 110, and maybe hit 115 as it did. And remember, when it hits 115, that was when we stopped the adjustments, June, July, and that was when the queues returned again. And that was when we were under a subsidy regime and we couldn't pay the BDCs and others for the. Now, from all these lessons, we are saying let's start putting a mitigation account in place to manage these things properly. I hope I have.
Well, we're going to come back to some of the issues, but we're going to take a very short break.
Yes.
And when we come back, I'd like us to look at another matter that has become a bone of contention between the opposition and government.
Yes.
And it's simply the question of whether or not we are borrowing too much of borrowing, our debt profile. Are we borrowing too much?
I would say that the pace at which we are borrowing against the background of the slowdown in the economy in the last 3 or 4 years, 3 years, is what has raised a concern. Because again, we are back to the measurement issue, like the per capita income. And these are the criteria by which countries are judged. So I hope that our listeners, will bear with me. For many countries, if we say we are a B-rated country, your borrowing should be within 48 to 50% of your GDP, ideal. You can go up maybe 42, 43. When you breach that, you are seen as moving towards debt, difficult situation. Now, the point at which alerts are raised is when you begin to inch towards 60%. And that is why there is a concern, because we are 60.8. But remember, it's a debt to GDP ratio. So if your GDP is not growing that fast, and then your debt is stabilizing or your debt is increasing at a faster pace, the ratio could go against you. The ratio could turn if your GDP also increases. That is not to give comfort. No, that's not my goal, because as your debt also increases, you also have to pay interest on them. And you have to make sure that it doesn't take too much of your budget resources. You remember the balancing I was talking about is as relevant for interest as it is relevant for wages. Or it is relevant even where you are expanding infrastructure but you don't have the money to pay for them. You just make contractors go and start projects, maybe borrow, and you don't have the money to pay them. It leads to difficulties, not just for the workers who have done the work, they lay off workers, but their banks go after them, they seize their property. The banks themselves may not get much relief because they are doing forced sales, so they have to declare losses, performing loans. So these things have consequences. Now, what can we do? I believe that's a question in a very structural sense. How can you develop your infrastructure and still not be debt ridden? That is a vexed question for many countries. And you know that even some advanced countries have that debt problem. Our approach is, first, last year we went to Cabinet and Parliament and said, let's change our debt management strategy. I think I mentioned one. if we build BUI, it shouldn't be on the taxpayer. BUI, the management of BUI should endeavor to pay for the dam from the process. If we build a gas processing plant, the plant should pay for the dam. That way you are establishing a stream of repayment for your loans, which is not on the taxpayer. That's the first. So let's take it that our debt, let's say at 60% is roughly with a GDP of about 40 billion, you say roughly 25 billion. If you knock off another 10 billion of these projects, and the projects start paying for it, you have room to reduce your debt and room to borrow to do social infrastructure, schools, which can be repaid from productivity. The economy becomes generally productive and everybody. So that is one of the
worry.
The second, I said two. Let me just explain. Okay. The second is, can we use our revenues, particularly oil and gas, given that those are new to us, in a way ring-fence them for development? And this is why petroleum revenue management was a good initiative, because it says 70% into the ABFA, the budget portion. 70% of that 70, approximately 50, must go into only infrastructure. We have said yes, but do we take the money and do infrastructure today, 30 style, or do we establish a fund and tell the markets that I have 50 million, 80 million coming in every year. If you give me 500 million to do the project now, that oil revenue is there to repay that loan. And in addition, if it's for a commercial facility, Ghana Infrastructure Fund, the project itself will also contribute to that fund. That way you are changing structurally how you manage debt and how you manage projects. And I would hope, and as I said, this is not new to Ghana. This is the approach of the 60s. When we say we expanded infrastructure in the 60s, these are some of the techniques that were used. And I think returning to them can help us.
The worry of your critics is that at 60.8%, of debt to GDP ratio, we are still borrowing. That's the worry of your critics.
I think there has been a moratorium on borrowing. We are not borrowing at the same pace as.
But we are going to the IMF, which would entail some borrowing.
That is for balance of payment support, to support the city. And it is the Bank of Ghana's activities, that would pay for that loan. So anytime you go to the IMF does not give loan for infrastructure development. It's a World Bank.
But it will still add to our debt portfolio, won't it?
Only to the extent that the central bank is not able. But the central bank has been good. The central bank has activities. Maybe later we can talk about seigniorage and other things which they are able to. The trading of foreign currency. They are the repository for foreign currency. And after all, they are getting the currency for it. Remember, that became necessary in our earlier conversation because the cedi was depreciating. And therefore, that activity, is good at repaying that type of, loan. The type of loan that would increase for the multilateral institutions is the World Bank loan, the type of concessional loans I was talking about, for 25 years. That one, is. But I get the sense of what they are saying and I understand it. But I'm saying that if we are to develop, it's also about infrastructure. So you keep the pace at which you are borrowing until your GDP can grow, but you can't also fold your arms and wait for your GDP to grow. You must implement policies, smart policies that have worked in other places. And this was a brain behind NIB, and I always say that NIB was Ghana's CDB, because the Chinese, for example, faced that problem. Until they created CDB, they had their state-owned enterprises, depending on their Ministry of Finance and depending on, the central bank for financing of the infrastructure. Until they created CDB, and all of them have to go. Today, CDB is a world, lender, which is and the CDB that accelerated Brazil set up BNDES for the same purpose. And remember, not too long ago, I believe in July or so, these same BRIC countries have established what they call the BRIC Bank to provide them with the money for infrastructure. The World Bank, during the last annual meetings, has set up a global infrastructure fund. And the Africa Development Bank has set up something called an Africa 50 fund for infrastructure. So we must have a smart way of financing our infrastructure to tap into these resources, because these go to the market like CDB.
So that's why we're proposing the Ghana Exim Bank.
The Exim Bank is for exports. The Ghana Infrastructure Fund is for
infrastructural development.
Infrastructure development.
There are reports in the media that you have not reached an agreement with the International Monetary Fund.
I think today,
if that is true,
today, the IMF mission has issued a statement saying that we have made progress in the discussions.
But you haven't come to the conclusion yet.
Because it's a process. You only come into conclusion technically when the IMF mission takes a report to the board and the board approves your program. But the 3 discussions we have had so far is positive to the extent that, they have acknowledged the policies that we ourselves have been implementing. And I would urge them.
My question is, this budget which was presented this week,
yes,
how does it, or how would it synchronize with the final agreement with the IMF?
Remember,
since we haven't concluded the agreement.
Remember first, I said in our earlier conversation that at a point in time when we had a homegrown policy, I think I didn't mention that, we also did Article 4, and as part of the Article 4, we submitted the homegrown policy to the IMF board, and they gave us comments. The staff, the management required the staff to give us comments, and they gave us comments. That you would say is our own, that's why we call it homegrown. It was developed along the lines of an IMF program. That is the truth of it.
So you knew what the IMF wanted, and you designed the program to look like that.
Well, Mr. Pryor, the point is that for a country which has done no less than 9 IMF programs since the Washington Consensus days, 1983, shouldn't we be able to analyze those programs and say to ourselves, in a structural sense again, like the Asians and the Latin Americans did, that when we have problems, what is the secret of correction that the fund has, and can we develop one for ourselves? So this negotiation, this negotiation, therefore, one of the inputs is our homegrown, program. Now, we made in the budget statement, I made a statement that we have implemented our policies, which we have incorporated in the budget, which we have discussed with the fund. After the board decision, we would come back to Parliament to see what is consistent or inconsistent with the policy. But we believe that we have incorporated as many of the policies as will be required. But I think I would wait for that opportunity, and maybe we can have another conversation as to whether we have.
At least at the level of theory, this budget is still open to revision.
No, we have always revised our budgets. That is the essence.
But based on the final agreement to the IMF.
No, I'm saying that we should not view that. We should not view the element of IMF as the only reason we revise our budgets.
But it may be a component.
It may be. Yes. But I'm saying that our constitution and our laws recognize that events change and require the Minister of Finance, remember, to go to Parliament with a media review where required. And where required, come with a supplementary budget. Last year we went without a supplementary. This year we went with a supplementary budget. So I think we have that mechanism already. We have often done it mid-year, but technically speaking, you can go at any time. But you can also go and make statements. Remember that when we consolidated all the policies that were in previous budgets, we went to Parliament just before they went on recess. So I think that we have that mechanism for reporting back to Parliament anytime something changes.
Finally, I'd like to find out the outlook for the city for 2015. In 2014, it had some difficulties.
Yes.
It started appreciating. Is this appreciation sustainable in 2015? Or do you expect some difficulties for the city in 2015?
We must make it sustainable. That is the essence of, the structural element of developmental economics. We know that the city, there's a period when the city comes under pressure. After the cocoa season, we've done the cocoa bond. There is, forex flow into the economy, usually. Then, almost immediately, the period we are in now, we enter the dry season. We enter into Christmas. And there's heavy demand for the city all the way through Easter, before the minor. The stabilizer has been gold, which flows through the year. So if gold prices fall, it means that the pressure of the absence of money or spending, becomes an issue. I think this is a sort of analysis that so what we are saying...
But the gold price is falling.
It's falling, yes.
The cocoa price is falling.
Yes.
That's not a very good sign.
No, cocoa price actually increased and is stabilized, and we sell futures. Cocoa price is actually... Remember last year, cocoa board did only 1.2 billion.
Mm-hmm.
This year they did 1.7 billion. With the potential of doing another 200 million, so nearly 2 billion, and that is on account of both output, potential output, and price, right? And so cocoa prices, and that actually accounted also for the appreciation of the and then the bond that we did, which also brought in for capital expenditure, right? But the point I'm making is that whether or not the city stabilizes next year or not, I think we should leave it. We should stop looking at nature and what it can do, and let's plan for that natural events that normally happen. And this is the reason Bank of Ghana introduced the swap arrangements, and the swap simply means in a period when you have foreign currency, like cocoa season, you can swap it for, say, the banks and others who need, cities. And then when you need, the foreign currency, they would give you back to stabilize. Again, you will see that I'm talking a lot about stabilization. We established a stabilization fund in the budget to stabilize the way, the budget goes up and down. We have introduced it for the automatic adjustments. We are talking about the same thing in terms of managing, because a stabilizer, in many cases, is always, and what we have lacked is that buffers or stabilizers for the economy to take us through the volatilities. But ultimately, the solution will lie in an outward looking economy that, at least, even if exports are not going to exceed imports, it will narrow the margin, so that it's not just a cocoa farmer. You provide an incentive for the non-traditional exporters and others to also contribute their bit, not just the minor. So it's in these measures, the EXIM institutions, the Ghana Infrastructure Fund, and whatever your institutions, and maybe, if I may quote President Obama, what Africa needs are strong institutions in addition to strong leaders.
So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very, very much for coming. Now, viewers, we've heard from Honorable Seth Terkper, the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning. He's explained the rationale behind the budget and some of the policy measures which have just been introduced. It is not possible to finish all of this discussion in one segment, and we do hope that you will continue the discussion, and especially if you follow our news affairs, if you follow our current affairs programs and so on, you get a lot more insight into the budget for 2015. So please keep your dial on TV3, where you can enjoy the best in news, best in current affairs, best in sports, and best in entertainment. It's goodbye from all of us from TV3.